Good afternoon. Thank you, Annie. Thank everybody here for this first session in the mobility track this afternoon. So this is really an interesting topic. Multimodal transportation is a key component of smart mobility approaches, and there's been some really interesting announcements recently we're going to discuss. So we have a panel. Unfortunately, one of the panel members had to cancel, but we have, I think, two great panel members. Maybe a quick introduction. Tim, could you start?
Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Evervold. I'm the Director of Automotive Line of Business at Covisint. Is that good?
Okay.
And I'm Sue Zielinski, and I'm Director of SMART at the University of Michigan, which stands for Sustainable Mobility and Accessibility Research and Transformation.
Okay. Looking forward to discuss multimodal with both of you. But before we do that, I would like to show a couple of quick slides kind of showing recent announcements and you know, how the automotive industry is coming to terms with intermodal or multimodal transportation. So I think it's all in the first place about providing information to the end user about the options in terms of different modes of transportation. So we've seen these journey planners, multimodal journey planners, you know, companies like MoveIt, Google of course as well, and here, which is still part of Nokia, but maybe not for very long anymore, have been very active since a couple of years in providing that intermodal information. Actually, there's two types here, in terms of transit at least, providing static timetables, but the next step would be to provide real-time transit information based on, you know, connected buses, connected trains, connected metros, which allow providing real-time information about delays, about buses and trains, which of course is a much better experience for the end user. But it's not just the likes of Google and here and others. The car industry itself is starting to understand that they need to also be part of that multimodal strategy. This is an example of a screen on the on BMW's connected drive on the i3, so the i brand of electric and hybrid vehicles, where you see that this is a mix of you know, driving, pedestrian, but also transit information. They also have a application on a smartwatch. I think they support both the Apple Watch and Samsung Gear, which allows a seamless experience getting out of the car, start doing pedestrian navigation, or all the way around finding your car back. So very interesting. And I think there's an interesting demo outside in the tent, INRIX, showcasing the BMW i3 with exactly this intermodal capability, with INRIX providing the transit information both in Europe and the US. So interesting to see a car brand moving into multimodal, making it available. And of course the synergies are clear. Electric vehicles, sustainability, intermodal and multimodal fits perfectly in that strategy. So it's interesting to see BMW, at least for its sub-brand, you know, really move ahead in multimodal. Another example, this is actually an example, a screenshot from the recently announced infotainment system on one of the new Jaguars, powered by HERE, so the vehicle cloud platform of HERE, where they provide seamless visibility on parking space availability. So if you drive somewhere and want to switch to either walking or transit, you can already see the parking space availability. So parking, real-time parking, is a key element in removing the friction between different modes of transportation. It's no point in driving somewhere if you can't park your car and then go either on transit or pedestrian. So that's a huge focus as well in this industry. But I think it goes further than that. There's been a lot of talk about car sharing, and if you think about car sharing a bit more deeply, and of course Uber is kind of the example we know currently, you start seeing that, you know, transportation is kind of moving towards a service, transportation as a service, whereby people, you know, abandon car ownership and rather buy transportation on a per usage basis, which kind of shows that, you know, thinking about multimodal, it's going to be a spectrum from still private vehicle ownership through various forms of on-demand public transport and shared personal vehicle services, all the way to high-speed mass transit, high-frequency mass transit. Yeah, Google is, I think, one of the companies that positions their driverless vehicle as a vehicle for smart cities, for car sharing, etc. So there's some really interesting dependencies here, which will certainly also be beneficial for intermodal and multimodal transportation. Actually, some of the journey planners already include car sharing when you ask for the cheapest, the shortest, or the most convenient route. There's an example from MX Data, a company based in the UK, sorry. Just the, here you see that, an Uber ride, 2 minutes, including pricing information, et cetera, et cetera. So car sharing is actually being considered now as an additional mode of transportation, an additional option going forward. And then maybe finally, before we start the discussion here, it's also important to realize, and I talked about parking, and parking is interesting because it allows to leverage big data. Ford has a very interesting trial as part of their smart mobility framework, a parking spotter using ADAS sensors to identify available street-side parking, capture that data and share it to other drivers looking for a street-side parking space, and in that way provide information. Actually, the demo outside here from INRIX is something similar. It's more based on historical, statistical data, pointing to streets with a high probability of available parking space in function of time of day, et cetera, et cetera. So big data is certainly going to fuel that multimodal experience, and it's something that can happen today with data existing today. It's just a matter of processing the data, making them available, sharing them over the cloud. So just these few slides to kind of set the scene for the panel discussion. So I think, Susan, I would like to start with you. You have a long experience in smart cities, transportation, multimodal. Can you share some of your findings, some of your insights in how this is kind of starting to materialize? Maybe talk about business models as well, and how this will further develop in the future.
Sure. Well, I think it's kind of an exciting time right now. We've been working on this at SMART. Our main goal is to advance integrated multimodal IT-enabled door-to-door sustainable transportation systems. Basically, more choices, more connected. So we don't sort of start with the car and work out. We look at the whole system. And I think that's been a bit too much to handle for many years. I think people can't kind of make it connected, but the rise of IT has allowed all these things to connect informationally. So it's much easier to understand how you can make this work for yourself, similar to how your desktop, laptop, printer, camera, everything connects. So I think probably it's best for me to share a couple of tools and platforms that we've been working on and really have found enlightening. To first of all, crowdsource all of the different innovations that, similar to what you see up there globally, and also to figure out how you apply seamless multimodal transportation systems. So the first thing, and you can talk to me after, I won't take too much time, but the first thing's called the Mobi Prize and Platform. Basically, it's a prize for any transportation mode, service, product, technology, infrastructure that is sustainable and integrated part of a whole system. So thanks to the Rockefeller Foundation, we launched that in 2012. We had it at Rio Plus 20. We had the last one at ITS World Congress. The next one is MobiX India, and it's going to be in Delhi. It's very exciting. There's an award for the best entrepreneur. There's an award for the best city or state that encourages a culture of innovation. And there's a Michigan-based award, India-based awards. So but the subversive plot of it is that the award builds this platform of all the different innovations in the world around multimodal, seamless transportation. The other thing, maybe I'll save it for later, I'll just give you a quick snapshot, is we've developed a methodology to help city leaders in regions apply seamless multimodal transportation systems. And it takes a day, but it's quite transformational. Basically, we bring together all the relevant sector leaders in transportation, including the entrepreneurs, the big business, from the whole range of sectors, IT, telematics, automotive. And we developed this with the support of Ford Motor Company, which is our main partner at SMART. And we realized that many cities don't know that they have a multimodal transportation system. So if you map it out, you bring all these different players together, the NGOs, and then the usual suspects in government, heads of planning, heads of regional development, tourism, economic development, innovation, bring them together around the map, around tables, map of the city, overlay everything. So car share, bike share, roads, bus stops, parking lots, the whole range of multimodal, of transportation. And wherever two or more things connect, you put a red dot. And people say, oh my goodness, leaders that have been in transportation for ages, oh my goodness, I didn't know so many of my buses, head of transit in DC said this, I didn't realize so many of my buses already connect to Zipcar, for example. So suddenly you have this system only a day. If you'd like to do it in your city, it's pretty easy, and it's very enlivening, because what we discovered later was that it's about yeses, not nos. Mostly transportation discussions are around food fights, my BRT versus your automated vehicle, when in fact this is about connecting it all in a way that supports the user. Think of that it's actually about the person moving from one thing to the other seamlessly. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. So Tim, Covisint very closely works with a large number of car manufacturers. So what's your experience with how they look, and I gave a few examples, I think, in the introduction, how they look at the multimodal, in particular, how it will impact their business in terms of will they sell fewer cars, will it help actually their image, because, you know, making traffic more smooth is definitely something which should be good for them. So how do you see this develop further from the car manufacturer's point of view?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. Number one, looking at, they recognize that there's different organizations, each with their own objectives, right? And much of what Susan was saying. So trying to bridge and bring together those organizations to interoperate seamlessly for the driver or for the person, rather than an individual owner or an individual organization. And they're starting to come to grips with that concept and recognize that's what we have to solve for, not necessarily just an owner or and whatnot. So with that in place, recognizing that they need to be able to understand the vehicle, understand how they can connect, and understand how they can have awareness of those different entities and coming together. Now, many of our customers and partners are still figuring out the different types of business models and the different approaches that they want to do, whether it be, you know, like BMW with their rideshare concept. How do they establish a rideshare? How do they establish and be able to have it placed in relevant places so that they can meet the demands of the availability of those rides? But what they're quickly finding out is that they also have to cope with the security, as well as the preferences for those drivers, so that when they go into one car, they can be validated, and then when they go into the next car, some of their preferences can be already there without having to restart that whole process. Another customer is, more focused around how does their vehicles relate to the city and the environment around it. So how do they make it easier to tie into parking and their apps transitioning from, okay, instead of just doing a POI search and downloading turn by turn, how can I start it on my phone, understand that, okay, I got to walk from the office to my car, get in my car, drive to this point, do the parking, and each of those stops and hops, you're transferring the conversation. So you need to have a capability that the conversation moves with the person, right? So you have to be able to transform the data.
That's a big topic. I think TomTom announced something with a companion app at the show. Here did it previously. Wearables are playing a role there, I think, if you get out of the car as well. So who do you see as the leaders here, and who are kind of more ambitious in this space than others?
Frankly,
we heard about Ford and BMW. Do you see others?
Yeah, I don't know that I would actually classify a leader at this point. I think there's a whole series of pioneers that are focusing on a particular area, not only at the OE level, but like you said, TomTom and here and some of those other partners that are trying to help the ecosystem. But at the end of the day, I don't think there will be a true winner if they focus on the win. Right, the real approach and the whole value about sustainability and multimodal is how does the community win and how do the drivers win. So there has to be this.
That's a difficult message for a very competitive industry to
It
accept,
is.
I guess.
So you have to recognize I need to embrace interoperability and then foster the brand experience. Okay? So guess what? I'm not relinquishing control when my driver leaves my car and gets into a train. I want to enable that transition to be able to keep the brand experience, the brand conversation going. Mm-hmm. And then when they do come back into the vehicle, then they finish and continue.
I see.
And ultimately, those would be the winners.
Yeah. So another interesting topic, I think, is not just car sharing, but also driverless buses. I've seen a few examples of trials or projects in Europe and Asia. Because one of the problems with transit is the lack of profitability. It's very expensive. Mm-hmm. Removing the driver from a bus might make that a little bit cheaper, maybe also more convenient, maybe more on-demand type public transport. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Susan, what do you think about making public transport, having it performing in an automated way? Reducing the cost, increasing the inconvenience, is that an important element, you think?
Yeah, I'm just thinking this very moment, but I am not against driverless buses. I think they can be appropriate in the appropriate situation, which is why one has to customize any regional multimodal system. But I actually don't think that it would be a cost saving. I think it might be an economic development opportunity, because my sense is that if you don't have a driver, and we have a lot of these conversations, we want to figure out what the monetization is and what the economic impacts are of driverless vehicles in general. But if you don't have a driver, it's really good to have someone else there to take care of people taking their tickets or making sure that things are fine, making sure the safety is good. So what you might have then is a transference between drivers and other types of jobs or employment. I'm not sure that the job saving side is going to be the really big economic benefit. And also the technology is a cost as well. So that's not scientific, that's just a question to us to start the dialogue.
What do you think about driverless buses, Tim?
Similar. I think that the value probably is more repeatability, more consistency, and actually more sustainability of the bus itself, because you don't have the variability and those kinds of things, rather than just a labor save. And then I think that's really a lot more thought and a lot more analysis has to be done to say, okay, how does this really work as an ecosystem, right? And how do we do it effectively?
Okay. Another example of innovation in transit is high-speed transit. I think Europe has its high-speed train network, which turns out to be very efficient. I think there's been some discussion in the US as well to have high-speed trains, LA, San Francisco. What's your take, Susan, on those kind of ideas?
I'm sorry, the reason I was smiling is because I don't know if anyone's seen the Onion take off on high speed. They created a high-speed bus, and someone sent that to me. And they put sort of a cone on the front of it, and they had guys in it with their ties. So I was completely distracted by it. So really, but look it up. It'll be a great thing that you can send to your multimodal friends. I think high-speed rail is fantastic. Applied in the right way. Oh my goodness, it's wonderful. I've gone on the Shanghai Maglev. I love it. The one in Norway is perfect multimodal. Okay, so that one is amazing because In Norway, you arrive in the airport. It's an all-glass airport. There are little footprints on the ground with journey-related poetry, right? And then you know exactly where to go. There's the escalator. I'm going to go straight down to the train. You get into the train, and someone is making announcements, and you can understand them. It's amazing. and you're there in seconds, and it shows the speed, and then they have BBC playing, but quiet enough so if you don't want to watch, like BBC, I mean, it's just like, that is high-speed experience as far as I'm concerned. However, what I do want to say is that high-speed rail cannot be seen as the panacea, and it shouldn't take the place. It shouldn't be seen as, once we get high-speed rail, then we're done. Let's get a whole bunch of money on it and make it a big capital investment. Really, I think it needs to be assessed in terms of the whole system, just like the theme of this session.
But there is a problem with transit in the US. I keep people saying there's not enough transit. The reason why people use their cars is simply because of the lack of transit. So does multimodal have a future in the US after all then, if you can't rely on good transit? And
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the implementation of multimodal will be different based on country, based on reason,
Okay.
and just based on geographics.
Sure.
Right, that's part of the biggest problem in terms of the U.S. and multimodal is how big and spread out it is.
Sure.
Right. So when you have a low population density, trying to have mass transit by definition doesn't work. But when you start introducing concepts like ride share, right? I like the concept of bike share and each of those pieces, which is multimodal, and I think that will start to progress more and have relevance in rural areas just as much as in urban areas. And then secondarily, if you look at autonomous driving, where it's going to go, there'll probably be two different models, right? Everybody focuses on autonomous driving in the urban areas. Most likely it'll probably trigger in rural areas first, just because of the distance, and driver non-attention and things like that.
Sure. Yeah. Let's stop here, but of course we open it up for Q&A now. So any questions for the panel members?
Anyone have a question?
We must have covered it.
I think you still have another 5 minutes until the next people come on, so I don't know, Dom, if you have any other questions.
Maybe talk a little bit more about the link between electric vehicles and multimodal. I think both are kind of addressing sustainability. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a way to put electrification in a broader perspective and not look at it as something isolated, but as one of the components in a multimodal environment. Susan, how do you see the link with electrification?
Sure. On just the physical location side, this work that we do has been really enlightening in terms of seeing where, if you have a connection point, you can do all sorts of things with that connection point. So you've mapped out, here's a connection point already, and maybe people didn't even know those two things connected, but you can start to develop it. So the more stuff you can put there, like lighting, for example, which is a really important thing, so that women on shift work in the middle of the night can actually think, oh, okay, well, I will take that bus, and then I'll get straight into the car share or something. So from the physical network point of view, you have more connection point places where you could have the electrification happen. And I think there's much more flexibility now for that to be able to happen. And the more that the cars are part of a fleet rather than your own, I think you also have that opportunity, and the more exchangeable that the batteries can be, and that's coming up as well. So I think that, combined with the last question, which is, what about cities that don't seem right for it? I think, as you were saying, even in rural places, the way that on-demand new services like specialized vans that are connected with apps that do route optimization that can provide not only last mile, but middle mile, and really make the connections, they can begin to tie together what you would have thought was a quite spread out place. I've been hearing, I haven't been to Las Vegas. I think I was in Las Vegas for an hour once, for some reason, but it seems to be doing some really interesting things, and you would never think of Las Vegas as the kind of place that would have a really interesting and important multimodal and even sort of work into electrification, but they do. So now is the time to be thinking outside the box and coming together with all the different sectors and players that are involved, business and government and NGOs, and making it happen and making all the S's happen for electrification and the multimodal at the same time.
Yeah, and, well, what we're seeing on the electric vehicle side with the current technology and the current charging locations, and while the infrastructure is trying to catch up to the number of electric vehicles, with electric vehicle you now have a concept that you have to deal with that you don't have to with traditional combustion engine is range. Okay, so now I have to know what my status is and know what my range might be, and then I have to have a safety factor, so you have to continually be aware. And then you also have to just know, okay, I'm going to have to go someplace where I can charge it. What's available, where they're at. And then guess what? A lot of times that may not be as convenient or local as if I just parked right in front of the front door. So I might need to rely on other modes of transportation to pick up that gap to encourage more adoption
Yeah, because a lot of these
EV.
multimodal journey planners have the range indicated as well, so as a parameter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think we can conclude it here. There's a question here at the front. Yeah, okay. The mic is coming, I think. Maybe wait for the mic.
I'm coming.
Within the U.S. anyway, at this conference we've talked a lot about the technological barriers and the new business model barriers that govern how fast change is going to happen. From your experience, what would you see are the biggest psychological issues that we have to get over for kind of U.S. consumers to adopt a more multimodal usage model faster? From just the human element, what's slowing things down, and what can we focus on beyond technology and business models?
Well, what we see is, right now, I think the biggest lack of adoption is twofold. Number one, it's that lack of continuity between the modes, okay? And that it's too much work. I actually have to sit down, think about it, plan about it, and our culture is all about, I got to get from point A to point B, and I just want to get there. And the old way is I can get in the car and I don't have to think, so therefore I don't have the adoption. So if we can bridge that interoperability gap between modes and between devices, that will be, I know it's a little bit of technology, but it's an important piece to really bring adoption forward. And I think if you can get that ease of use and you can get a little bit more front of mind, that'll drive adoption.
And I think it's about saving cost as well. I mean, one of the reasons why Uber is so successful is obviously the lower price. So if you can offer multimodal at a lower cost compared to the car, I think there will be interest. If it's seamless, convenient, at the same time, of course. So that's the conditions, I think.
And then the transportation lease that you mentioned earlier, I think that's a real possibility, but yet there still has to be quite a bit thought out about, okay, where am I going to place all of my vehicle placement centers, if you will, so that I know as a transportation leaser, I can get from A to B to C, and there will be a available transportation. If they can figure that out, I can see there's a real market, because guess what? Now I don't have to worry about the parking. I don't have to worry about the maintenance. I just get the use.
Yeah, and on that, mind if I jump in? No, on that level, the whole notion of multimodal hubs, you think about like a big Union Station with all these different, coach stations and stuff. But actually, we've looked at it from a taxonomy point of view. And if you do it the way that we've been doing, and by the way, we did that mapping work first just to get an inventory, and we brought all the folks together just to help us. And then we saw this transformation happen where the folks around the table hadn't actually even some of them met each other. And they often didn't even know that those two things connected already. And so you can have these kind of mini hubs that are already there. So in terms of cost savings, it's unbelievable. And the same with, we were in South Africa, and the business folks, the big businesses were saying, well, those government people won't tell us where the train station's going to be. And so we can't do anything yet. And then somebody who owned a chain of grocery stores said, well, you know what? I mean, now that I think of it, I have a parking lot in front of every grocery store, like a Kroger's or something. And in front of that every parking lot, I think, is a bus stop. I'll have to check, but I think there's a bus stop. So why don't we put a car share, a bike share, a taxi stand there? People can, take a bus to the shopping center and taxi back, or they can go from there to somewhere else. So you've got all these possibilities of not needing to depend on policy. I mean, I think in the US we're very sort of policy dependent. We think that that's the way it works. It's sort of top down. It's a very entrepreneurial culture, and I'm Canadian, so I've sort of seen this a little bit from the outside. But really, there's an opportunity to do so many things for really really inexpensively. And in fact, much less expensively than, accidentally, if you haven't done this mapping, building a BRT over top of the subway track. So I think, if we think about pulling these pieces together in a way that works like it would have to work in the first places that we were working, which was India, Brazil, South Africa, where there might not necessarily be good land use, good policy, or good leadership around this issue, then you're looking at how you can bring all those things together in a multimodal way. It's pretty exciting that these days you can, with a combination of services and technologies, as long as you have the mindset of saying, we just need to put it together. And I don't mean to make it easy at all, but I think we can do a lot more outside of policy and outside of gigantic budgets by, for example, cities encouraging innovation like what they're doing in Scotland, Finland, and Sweden. National governments have it in their constitutions to invest in and match investments in mobility as a service. This is a really exciting development that it's coming from the big business and the big government from the point of view of the service. So
I hate to interrupt you, Susan, but I think that's all we have time for. So thanks very much. Give them a round of applause.